Just heard South Africa shares border with 6 nations. Lax border controls, though, have increasingly become a problem over the years, with the failing economies of some of Southern African development community, that SADC countries, leading to a wave of migration, often illegal. But opportunities for trade within the bloc could have improved the economic situation. Build One SA leader Mmusi Maimane says what's needed is a review of visa processes for SADC nations. It's not the first time he's been talking about this. He's joining me now just to further expand on this here on Today this afternoon. Mmusi, good afternoon. Welcome to Today, and thank you very much, sir, for your time this afternoon. It's not the first time you've had to address issues around our border management for over the past few years, including when you were in the DA, now as a leader of BOSA, as recently as from when you founded BOSA, you've been saying the same thing. We need a review of our visa requirements and how we manage our borders. But it doesn't seem that we're making any headway. Are we making any progress at all from your knowledge?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to fellow South Africans. I think the most crucial issue to look at is South Africa and its relationship to its neighboring countries has been one that hasn't been strategic. It hasn't focused on South Africa's national interests, and ultimately has allowed dictators to continue to thrive. Before anyone can stand up and say, let's fix the border situation, let's recognize that we've allowed for ZANU-PF not to do the job that they need to do. So it's a bit like someone saying water is leaking into my house, but they refuse to fix the tap from which it comes from. So let's start there. And then secondly, I've been very intentional about saying visa adjudication is absolutely vital. We have to be issuing not only business visas, but find the best ways to say, how do we manage and adjudicate visas quickly for immigrants coming into the country? Because to blame immigrants for our failure to be able to govern as a country is in fact a misdirection of the issues. The failure of the Home Affairs has got nothing to do with immigration. It's the fact that we've only got 7 Home Affairs offices, as Minister Motsoaledi has said, that are functional for anyone to apply for refugee status or for anything like that. And then the last thing I would make, and that's a very important point, is that if you digitize the system, then you avoid these extensive lines, these processes where people feel they have to circumvent legality to be able to come into the country. All of us know when somebody has legal certainty, I am here to put it on record that I would think the immigrants that are in the country actually also desire to go back home. They want to have the freedom to be able to go back to their home countries if that's what needed. And the only way you can do that is by making sure that your adjudication of visas is effective as possible. If I go to any country in the world, they will adjudicate my visa, determine my conditions, and ultimately give me the freedom to come in and out as the country prescribes. Why is South Africa failing at that basic level? I would argue that it has everything to do with the ANC's relationship with ZANU-PF and its failure to manage what goes on in Zimbabwe.
Why is the Zimbabwe Effect a key in this?
It is crucial because when you look at the current court cases that have been undertaken, we never used to have this problem. If you, in fact, reflect just before the 2007-2006, we managed immigration. It was then when President Mugabe lost the elections that we had an inflow as part of the negotiated settlement for a government of national unity to open our borders freely to Zimbabweans coming into the country and anyone else. And so what then happened is that you had an influx of low-skilled workers coming into the country, and that's creating the sort of tensions that we see in many communities. Given that this is where we are, the original challenge is to deal with democracy in Zimbabwe, make sure Zimbabwe is functioning as a economic hub that it was designed to do, and make sure that when there are illegalities that take place in the electoral process, South Africa must be the first. We're one of 3 countries that went to go congratulate Emmerson Mnangagwa on his election, whereas the rest of the continent knew that there were irregularities with that election. And that goes for Eswatini, etc. I think we need a special case for Lesotho, because when we look at the issue of Lesotho, Lesotho is landlocked within South Africa. I really believe we can make a different provision for nationals that come from Lesotho by adjudicating, even in some ways, passport control from Pretoria rather than, in fact, in Lesotho border.
Yeah, should we follow the example of Botswana and Namibia, that early this year they abolished the use of visas altogether in passports. If you are a Botswana citizen, you going to Namibia, or vice versa, you're in Namibia and you're going to Botswana, you only have to show your ID at the border post. No passport, no visa required. We talk about an integrated community to promote trade and investment between us. Should we go that route rather than be worried about visas, Mmusi?
No, I think South Africa could ill afford to do that. We are the largest economy in the SADC region. Not only do we have to deal with the influx of immigrants, not only from neighboring countries, etc., we have to often deal with the rest of the continent, be it Nigeria, Kenya, in as far as that. We also have to recognize the fact that we, as part of the international community, as a gateway into the rest of the continent, South Africa deals with as a point of departure for anyone to access Africa. If you are coming from the Middle East, from anywhere else, and you want to go to Botswana, you have to land at OR Tambo. So if we don't have a visa regime, it puts South Africa in a very vulnerable space. What we do need to do is make sure the application process for that is digitized, it's online, it's quick. And secondly, that we create a visa for the SADC region that all of us can manage, so that we know when somebody is here for trade, what the conditions look like, etc. And then the last thing I think, that's absolutely vital for our country, is that we need to define and enforce our own laws. You can't have someone who comes from any other country arriving in South Africa and creating conditions that look like where their country of origin is. So by that, I mean you can't in the city center of Johannesburg have things like Little Lagos, or have places like Little Ethiopia, or whatever the place might be, or Chinatown. It's because you can't have pockets of your society that have rules that are not consistent with those of your domestic country. And therefore, the laws of this country must reign supreme, the languages we speak must remain, and ultimately the culture. And as immigrants come into the country, we must make sure they operate in the rules of where this country comes from. That must be standard, because that's the best way to manage immigration. If I want to go to Germany, I have to have some semblance of German and know what the culture and the context of Germany is. South Africa cannot be exempt from the same process.
So you would say we would need, for in the SADC perspective, a visa for economic migrants. What about low-skilled workers?
Well, I do think in that particular dynamic, a standard visa is applicable. If they're applying fundamentally for refugee status, that can also be adjudicated, because then you have to prove all of that. And when it comes to low-skilled workers, I do think one of the ways we can manage this issue, because as many people are already in country, I think as you see in other countries like the UK and many others, they've taken a view that adds an additional tax for someone who's coming into a skilled job or a low-skilled job. So if you want to be a waiter and you're a non-South African, you have to pay an additional tax. What that does is that it makes sure that you are contributing to the fiscus, so that we don't have capital outflows of money that goes to different places. And furthermore, we can ensure that for an employer who is looking, if you want to help behavior, you've then got to be able to say, is this particular worker vis-a-vis a South African worker better in one way or another? And then, Braden, I think before we also become those who blame either apartheid or immigrants for our failures, the truth of the matter is that we are asking our young people to compete for jobs with people who are highly skilled coming from elsewhere in low-paying jobs. So you can't ask a child from Limpopo to compete, for example, for a job with a teacher from Zimbabwe in a waitering environment. I think no one would accept that their child should do that. So that's why you must introduce a tax regime that ensures that. But South Africa has the obligation that we educate our young people, we help them focus on the future so that they can compete with anyone who comes from anywhere in the continent or the rest of the world.
Mmusi Maimane, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Mmusi Maimane is, of course, the leader of Build One SA, Bosa, just weighing in there some of his views, which he's held for quite some time, about the whole issue of a new visa regime that would require to protect South Africa, especially in this region of Southern Africa, as a SADC member state.